Why understand accumulative strain? When we have a more clear understanding of something, we can have a better chance of problem solving. And this is a new understanding of pain and injury that allows us to find the most effective solutions in the short term and for the long run also. This is a general explanation. If you aren't already booked in, I encourage you to speak with a Ridgway Method certified practitioner to understand how this matches what you're experiencing. You might ask where this new understanding comes from. Different sources in the literature, like these ones listed here, has provided me with specific aspects of the explanation. I pieced together the most relevant insights in a way that matches every client I've seen and all pain and injury I've learned about since graduating my physiotherapy degree in 1995. This graph is a symbolic representation. The lines are not drawn to a specific scale. On the y-axis, we have strain and irritation that is sensed by the nervous system in our bodies. We refer to these as dysfunctions and unhappy states. For example, this might look like a tight muscle, or a weakness or an inability to bend forward, or neck stiffness where you're unable to turn our head. The measure on this line is an average of all of the dysfunctions within our body. Along the x-axis we have time, and this time can represent over our lifespan or a shorter period of time that's currently more relevant. This line here depicts the pain and symptom threshold. When the total average of dysfunctions is measured below this line, no pain or symptoms are experienced. When the dysfunctions are measured above this line, we experience pain or other symptoms like pins and needles, numbness, sharp shooting feelings and burning feelings, etc. These lines here summarize multiple examples of how dysfunctions can change over time. This blue line represents minimum dysfunctions, when the body has nearly no problem at all, and a person with this amount of dysfunctions has ideal performance. This maroon line here represents very common experience where the dysfunctions accumulate with our varied behaviors over time. For example, we may be performing activities that are beyond our physical and mental capacity, and this can be seen during activities such as sustained sitting postures for too long, or too many repetitions of lifting, or challenges during sport with high endurance and strength requirements, and also in trauma. Now, it's these dysfunctions which are what blocks ideal performance. Even when we're pain-free, this is the case. And when we continue our unhelpful behaviors, we aggravate parts of our body, and that exacerbates the dysfunctions, and they accumulate. This part of the line down here illustrates how we can also change our behaviors to reduce the dysfunctions while we're pain-free. We can create more helpful behaviors and decrease the accumulation and decrease the aggravation and accumulation of strain, and therefore decrease the resulting dysfunctions. This point here on the graph shows us that when we accumulate strain to a point where our brain decides the amount of dysfunctions is significant enough, then it's time for our brain to create pain and or other symptoms, and at the same time the dysfunctions also dramatically increase in most cases. Now, this has an important purpose of preventing us from continuing our unhelpful behaviors and makes us stop or modify our activities and seek help. Next is a summary of what's happening inside our bodies so we can understand what can be done to most effectively fix accumulative strain problems. Here I'm providing an example of one problem to keep it simple, and we'll start with the ideal optimal state. All parts of our body have sensory nerve endings that carry electrical signals to the spinal cord and up to the brain. And these signals summarize the state of our body parts. A few are shown here as a way of representing many. We also have electrical signals to the subconscious brain, summarizing our thoughts and feelings and our conscious choices of behaviors. A reflex response happens from these signals, and we know it's a reflex because it happens in less than 300 milliseconds. And this reflex response in this ideal state occurs with ideal functions. Summarized here in this list of nerves, joints, and muscles operating very well, we'll have good movement without any restrictions. And after each of these signals is received, the subconscious brain takes more than 300 milliseconds to process the information and decide what the next step is. In this case, because the signals are in an ideal state, the subconscious brain has no reason to create any symptoms or pain. In this image I'm showing here, this body chart on the right shows us and what we feel in our conscious experience. And this is may be depicted as pain and or other symptoms. And in this case, there's no pain at all. This side of the body chart shows us the subconscious processes that are going on in our body. These images are depicting the same body. We're all human and we don't live perfectly all the time. So now we'll see an example of unhelpful behaviors just gradually starting to aggravate a certain area in our body with some overload. And in this example, what I'm showing you is aggravation to one part of the body more than any other. The electrical signals that indicate this aggravation are very minor at this stage, and therefore the reflex response is still not significant. Therefore, the ideal movement and happy function throughout our body unrestricted remains. And after all of this is summarized by the subconscious brain, it decides still there is no reason to create any symptoms. Now we'll see what happens when unhelpful behaviors continue and the aggravation accumulates even more. And this image illustrates how our body is sensing the signals and conveying greater unhappiness with a darker color. As the aggravation to this body pass increases and the strain increases, the reflexive responses become more significant. And what that means is each of these functions within the body is now somewhat restricted in multiple different parts of the body. We may have experienced this as something like tight muscles, and for example, if we stretch them, they revert to being tight soon after. Or maybe weak areas in our body, even when we strengthen them. And when I saw that this is the case in the human body, I really needed to be honest with myself and see that there really is a good reason for why there are multiple dysfunctions throughout any body. Now, in this case, I'm illustrating the dysfunctions are still under a threshold. So the subconscious brain summarizes that there's still no reason to create symptoms. So we still remain pain-free. As time goes on, we often do persist with our unhelpful behaviors, and the aggravation to the accumulative strain increases to reach a threshold. The unhappy signals become very strong, and therefore the reflexive response is to increase dysfunctions throughout the body significantly, and we become debilitated in some specific movements. And this also creates a response of frustrations, worries, and concerns as well. In this state, we can't live our healthy activities and our quality family time. And after all of these signals, including the worst aggravated area, are interpreted by the subconscious brain, it decides the best strategy to minimize continued aggravation is to create pain and other symptoms in the most effective location and map it into the body. Often these locations of the pain are very different to the location of the worst aggravations and may not be initially obvious to us why the subconscious brain chooses this body part. Usually when we look at our lifestyles, we can see how this is actually a helpful strategy for preventing increasing accumulative strain. For example, in this image, it illustrates the worst aggravation of accumulative strain being in the mid-back region, and the pain is created by the brain and mapped into the head and neck region of, for for example, an office worker that sits and concentrates hard all day. Or in the forearm of a tennis player, or in the hamstring location of a runner. It is an individual response. Now, to fix the problems here of these symptoms, what's required is to break the feedback loop of this aggravation and reflexive dysfunctions, so the subconscious brain has no reason anymore to create the symptoms. It's now time to seek help, but what kind of help is going to be most effective? The most effective help is to objectively test every part of the body to measure where the aggravation and strain is occurring and accumulating. When a practitioner tests all of the dysfunctions in a body, we're able to use these measures to scientifically problem solve and quickly show how effectively we can release the aggravation and strain accumulation, and then see that it improves the dysfunctions immediately. So effective treatment to an area has the result of calming down the unhappy nerve signals, and this immediately calms down the reflexive response of these dysfunctions. This allows us to regain movement without restriction again. Our nerves glide well, our joints move better, and our muscles all function well again. And what we find is most often the treatment to the worst aggravated area is the one that results in multiple dysfunctions immediately improving throughout the body, which then has the result of the subconscious brain no longer requiring to create the symptoms, and the problem that we suffer is fixed. Once the thorough process for demonstrating this and most effective treatment is complete, we commonly see improvements within each session that are reflected on the right side of the graph here that we call a progress graph. The progress is depicted here in each session with improvements from high dysfunctions to improving dysfunctions. So therefore we have better function immediately within a session. And then between sessions, if the duration is as short as possible, like within the same day or the next day, ideally, and then we have treatment again to decrease the dysfunctions and improve function again. In many cases, the rate of improvement, such as illustrated here, can be achieved in a week or less, and within 3 to 4 hours of assessment and treatment time. In a smaller percentage of cases, the extended improvement is demonstrated within a week and may take multiple more weeks until we can get to the pain-free full function zone. What we're able to say is we can quickly work out whether we can fix your complaint or not. And we don't get dramatic improvements, and therefore we call it. And at that time, we have a discussion about how it is we can find someone else who may be able to get the results that our skill set can't get. When the treatment to the most effective area in the body is complete and we are back under the pain and symptom threshold line, we're pain-free, full function, the first step of what has been blocking ideal performance and sustained function, pain-free for the rest of life, has been achieved. So the first step has been achieved because what was blocking has been removed. There are still more things blocking. What we have next to do is to remove what's blocking ideal movement. And that means we re-educate ideal movement now that the body's in a happy state, ready to accept that. This requires specific types of muscle control around the area that was most significantly suffering. And we integrate that muscle control into exercises and progress those exercises into all of life's activities. In other words, these are ideal behaviors for life. And we also then combine feedback of monitoring of the key dysfunctions for reaccumulation of strain, which can be done as self-testing and during tune-ups with your practitioner, so that everyone can be confident no reoccurrence is occurring, or we can catch any reaccumulation of strain before it goes too far and before it reaches this pain and symptom threshold line again. So in tune-up sessions, we can provide treatment again to get the dysfunctions back down close to ideal. So this combination of self-testing and getting tested by the practitioner in tune-ups allows us to monitor how effectively we are maintaining our ideal state, even while pain-free. This gives us a chance to measure immediately whether any of our activities are creating a reaccumulation of strain and aggravating our body parts. So the line down here represents when we're getting back into full life. It is natural then to gradually build the cumulative strain again. And that's why we find it so important for you to monitor and for you to use tune-ups to make sure you remain under this line. So it is the habits that get created out of exercises and progressing ideal muscle control into everyday life and everyday life activities that allows us to hold our bodies in best shape with minimal re-aggravated strain as long as we possibly can. This has been a brief summary of musculoskeletal pain and injury and intended to show how simple pain is. And more importantly, that approaching the problem solving with a systematic and scientific structure allows us to get back to the important functions in our lives, including our healthy activities and quality family time, in a way that's not possible with other perspectives. Now, this understanding of musculoskeletal health is different from the norm, so it is understandable if it initially creates some confusion for some of us. And when we see how effective this understanding is, we have a chance to appreciate that this kind of difference is very helpful. And as I explained in the beginning, the relevance of this understanding to your situation may require more specific explanation. I also intend this explanation to provide us with a good understanding of how improving performance, sustaining full function pain-free for the whole rest of life is actually very possible.